Welcome all. Max the Accidental Engineer here. Today we are joined by Jose Moreno, Senior Software Architect at Netflix.
Yep.
Jose, do you mind sharing for our audience a little bit about what it is that you have done in the several years you've been at Netflix as a software engineer?
So I've been on two teams at Netflix so far. I joined the globalization technical infrastructure team initially,
Okay.
GTI, not a consulting company. And then I recently moved over to the content algorithms team about a year ago.
Cool. And for our audience that doesn't know Jose had spent over 6 years at Microsoft before joining Netflix. And we actually went to college together, where Jose was a computer science major at Harvey Mudd College in Los Angeles.
Yep.
So going back to how you got into software engineering, a lot of our audience is curious about first jobs that people got out of college or otherwise. Do you mind sharing how you ended up at Microsoft?
Yeah, so after my junior year, I decided that I wanted to do an internship. And it was actually a rough time because that was 2008.
Oof.
Right? Yeah, so it was pretty hard to get a job that year, and I got a lot of rejection. So I interviewed with quite a few different places, and nobody was really hiring that much, so it was pretty tough. And Microsoft recruiter just randomly sent out an email to Harvey Mudd. At this point, they weren't actually recruiting at Harvey Mudd very much, but they were like, hey, if you're interested in a position at Microsoft, send us your resume. So sent my resume, had a phone interview. It was kind of a whirlwind. All of a sudden, I'm like flying to Seattle. I was kind of already facing a lot of rejection, so I was like, I'm probably going to get rejected again. But went through the interview, and everything went really well. They decided to give me an internship, and I took it. Internship was over the summer. I think it was 10 weeks. And at the end of the summer, I guess I impressed them enough for a full-time offer.
Oh, for sure. And then you spent the next 6+ years there?
That's been 6+ years there, yeah.
So for our audience, a lot of our audience did not get computer science degrees in undergrad. How did you end up knowing that you wanted to do computer science in undergrad?
So growing up, I always thought that I was going to be like doing something with math. I didn't grow up in a technical family, right? My parents immigrated from El Salvador, so they knew nothing about computers. But I loved math, and so I thought I was going to be a mathematician. I think when I was really young, I used to call it mathemagician.
Nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't there a Harvey Mudd professor?
There is, yeah, and he's amazing. Like he can square numbers that are like 6 digits long in his head.
Nice.
I have no idea how he does it.
Is he what attracted you to Harvey Mudd?
He is not. No.
Okay.
That was also an interesting story. But so I was focusing on math, and then my junior year of high school, they decided to teach the first computer science course. And the description said, if you love math and if you love computers, then come check out this course. And I was like, I like math. I like computers. I like playing Wheel of Fortune on computers anyways.
For sure.
Might as well check it out. And like after taking that class, the rest was kind of history. I fell in love with it. Started taking some community college courses that summer, and then they offered an AP computer science class my senior year. Took that, and from there I just knew that I wanted to do it.
So a lot of the hurdles that I think people early on in software engineering, whether they've even gotten their first job or not yet, is an issue encountering a lot of people is having the confidence to do software engineering and do programming. Sounds like early on having a high school course that showed you what it was like was a pretty positive, reinforcing experience.
Yeah.
When you got to Harvey Mudd, I'm not joking about it being the MIT of the West. Was it really intimidating to take your first CS classes?
Oh, it was crazy intimidating. When I went to Harvey Mudd and I majored in computer science, I just assumed that everybody else has been doing it since they were like 5 years old.
Yeah.
That everybody's just been coding their entire lives, and I've been doing it for maybe 1 or 2 years, and like courses that were relatively simple. So I was definitely intimidated.
So what was those first intro CS classes like? Were your fears validated?
My fears were not validated. I actually realized that everybody was kind of around the same level. There were definitely some people who like had parents who were computer science, and they were like way ahead of the curve initially,
Mm-hmm.
but they didn't have like all of the technical background that you learn in college, right? Or your courses.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely leveled out after, especially the intro courses. And I actually also learned that although there were other people that were doing computer science majors, they had not taken classes in high school.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted to do CS, but they were still new to it. And so I was actually ahead of the curve just with like a couple high school classes. So yeah, it was definitely unfounded.
So a lot of people never got their computer science undergrad. What curriculum-wise do you think or have found the most valuable 10 years out of college
Yeah.
from your undergraduate education?
Which class?
Which class, which specific subjects, concepts?
Data structures and algorithms. And so Microsoft actually, they weren't recruiting initially when I got the internship, but then they did start recruiting. I guess I impressed them a little bit, and they started focusing on Harvey Mudd.
Yeah.
And they would fly me back every single year, and I would talk to a lot of the students who were interested in like doing internships or full-time jobs. And to prepare them for the interviews, I always said, go back and read your data structures and algorithms like book, because that's what interviews are really focused on, right? You start talking about linked lists, you talk about dictionaries, and just a whole bunch of algorithms in terms of like how to potentially optimize certain problems, how to think about it different ways. So I think that class is the most important class. The rest of them were just kind of like, yep, here's some other kind of subjects to learn.
What were some of the other subjects that you learned that, separate of data structures and algorithms, that were the most interesting to you?
So I actually like fell in love with machine learning while I was at Harvey Mudd as well. So I took some machine learning classes with Professor Alvarado. And
Shout out to
Professor Alvarado. UC San Diego now.
Oh, no
Yeah,
way.
yeah, she moved down there. And so machine learning was an awesome course. We had a clinic that was kind of like a senior long project, right, with an actual company who came in and hired a team. That was pretty valuable as well. Although I was a program manager for that team as opposed to a software engineer. That was kind of interesting.
So you were not coding as
I was
in your
not
senior
coding,
year
yeah.
for that project?
I was not, actually.
Interesting.
And,
That was in contrast to your internship the summer before?
Yeah. And
What did you
I
learn?
was going in as a software engineer for Microsoft that following year. So the second semester I was like, maybe I should be coding for this. And by the time that like I was like, yeah, I want to do a little coding for this project, everybody's like, well, we're kind of done already. We were actually like really well prepared. I guess I did a solid job as a program manager because we were ahead of the curve. Yeah.
What was it that you guys were tasked with doing for your senior project?
So the company was called Genius.com,
Sure.
if I remember correctly. Basically, they send out marketing emails for different companies, and they had an issue where basically if I would send you an email, they didn't really know if you forwarded that email to somebody else. And they had metrics around it, right? So if you clicked on the email, they had metrics around that. But if you forwarded it to somebody else and then they clicked on it, they wouldn't know if it was you or a third party that was clicking it. So they wanted us to look into a potential solution for how to figure out if it's a third party clicking the email or if it's you.
Got it.
We actually took like a machine learning kind of route to it, and at the end of the day found that the most useful thing was to just kind of put in a good cookie into the first time somebody clicks into it, right? Because then we can assume you're the first party.
Yeah.
And if the second time we see that it doesn't exist or it's a different like good, then all right, it's a third party. So that was we did so much analysis out of this thing, and it was basically just kind of like, okay, we'll just put in a unique identifier in there.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So you spent 6.5-ish years at Microsoft after graduating Harvey Mudd. What all teams were you working on there? What all projects were you working on there? Was it exclusively as a software engineer?
Software engineer throughout my time there. I was on like 4 different teams, I think. I had to count it back.
Is that super abnormal at Microsoft?
So most of them, no, I think it's mostly pretty normal because you go through like some reorgs, right, while you're at a company that big. So I started off on Windows Live Profiles, and then was reorged into Social Update Platform, then reorged into Live ID, which is now Microsoft accounts.
So a lot of our audience probably doesn't know the phrase reorg as a verb. So
yeah.
I'll break it down really quick and
Yeah,
then we
absolutely.
can keep going with what exactly teams you're on. But a reorg is a reorganization of a company's hierarchy
Yep.
or focus team-wise.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens often at large companies when managers get promoted or managers leave, is teams get reallocated or product priorities or service priorities change.
Yeah,
So
that's exactly it.
it's not so shocking that in 6+ years at Microsoft you ended up on 4 different teams.
Yeah.
And
sometimes managers just kind of shift from one team to another, right? They're reorg themselves, like maybe a couple skip levels ahead of you, and they decide to bring over some team members with them, and that's kind of part of the reorgs as well. And that's how I ended up on Microsoft ID or Microsoft accounts by the end of it.
So which were kind of the more interesting teams to work on, if you don't mind being opinionated?
I love the first 2 teams for a couple of reasons. I thought the subjects were really interesting, but I think my teammates in those 2 teams were world class. Like, I owe a lot of what I learned my first few years, or a lot of the things that I learned, to them. Like, they built some high scale systems. I say they as I helped. Maybe.
What were these teams specifically?
Windows Live Profiles. So the idea for Windows Live Profiles, and you kind of see it now, was to centralize your profile information for your Windows Live ID, right? So this wasn't true in 2009, but it is true now. If you log into a Windows 10 machine and move to another Windows 10 machine, all your configurations and your data comes with you, right? So there was a big kind of shift inside of Microsoft to say, okay, we need to centralize this information. So Windows Live Profile was the first team that did that. Second one was Social Update Platform. This does not exist anymore, unfortunately.
Sure. This is also not uncommon at
Live. Yeah, exactly. But when Windows Phone first launched, they had a very interesting idea in terms of integrating all your social networks into one location. So you don't have to jump to different apps to see your LinkedIn feed, your Facebook feed, and your Twitter feed. So what we did on the team was we grabbed all your different feeds, combined it into one location, and then on your phone, you just go to that one spot and you get your feed. You don't have to jump around from app to app. So I found that super interesting. And one of the things that I ended up kind of owning there, probably my first time really owning a big feature, was being able to pin, let's say I'm interested in Macs, right? I could pin it on my phone. Sure. And anytime you updated something, I would get a live tile notification on my phone. Mac's status has updated, or, oh, check it out, there's a new podcast video. Sure. So I would get it right on my home screen, and I don't have to look around or look into seeing that you put a new video up.
So after your time at Microsoft, I know one of the big reasons that you decided to move to Netflix is that Seattle, and where Microsoft is headquartered, has a very specific climate.
Yeah.
And so quality of life is a really important thing in life generally.
Yeah.
Do you mind speaking to how you came to the decision to move on from Microsoft, and
Absolutely.
that Netflix was the place to go to?
So I grew up in LA. I went to school in LA and then moved out to Seattle. So I actually grew up in the Valley, San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, right? Where the temperatures would get up to 110 in the summer. And I played football in high school, so I would be in full pads. I would be dying in that heat, just dying. So when I first moved out to Seattle, I was like, okay, I was super welcoming of the climate. 50s, 60s, this is perfect. It's amazing. But one of the things that you end up learning pretty quickly is that the sun does not come out in Seattle very often. It's not the rain. People mistake it for the rain. The rain's okay. It's very light, so it's not really that big of a problem. But the sun, not coming out for weeks at a time, for months at a time, that started kind of getting to me. And so you hear about seasonal affective disorder. 2 years before I moved out of Seattle, I legitimately felt depressed for the first time in my life. And Carol, who's my significant other, right? She's like, oh, why don't you try taking vitamin D pills? And I was like, okay. So I started taking them. A couple weeks later, I'm dancing around, and I was like, oh my God, this thing has legitimately got to me. So I wanted to get back into a sunny place.
Nice. And
Basically
Los Gatos, California?
Yeah, Los
Pretty
Gatos,
sunny
yeah,
place?
it's really nice out here. Yeah, and it's not too hot, so it still kind of works itself out.
You mentioned that in undergrad, machine learning was a topic you were interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like it was only once you got to Netflix that you professionally got placed onto projects that used machine learning.
Yeah.
I know we can't really get too specific about what Netflix is doing with machine learning, but our audience, I think, would be really stoked to hear about specific tools that you guys are using.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you are particularly interested in classification or regression problems, what different kinds of data sets are interesting to you personally.
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
Terms?
So in terms of tools, I've used personally two big ones. One's TensorFlow, which seems to be pretty standard across the industry these days.
Mm-hmm.
And actually one that's not heard of as much is Deep Learning 4J. So most of the code that's written at Netflix is in Java. I found Deep Learning 4J, which allows me to do machine learning models in Java.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to worry about integrating like models that were created in Python into our Java-based applications, right? I was able to create them in Java and just kind of easily adopt it. So I decided to use Deep Learning 4J so far. And so far it's been pretty nice in terms of allowing me to do the same things, or a lot of what TensorFlow allows me to do, and build models and use them in our Java services.
Got it. Is much of the work that you do exploratory, or is it more building up services that are high reliability type of stuff?
So I have a unique kind of position in that I do both. I think it works out really well for me because machine learning is definitely, or when you're creating machine learning models, it's very exploratory, right? Like it may or may not work. And there have been times where it's like a month of me looking into something, trying to create a model, and like it's just not working. So you analyze the data and then you look at the data and it could be like very dirty. So after like a month, maybe 6 weeks, you have nothing to show for what you've done. So
dude, that's brutal. For
people
whose careers are on the line,
exactly.
I understand completely.
It happened earlier this year for me. So after those like 6 weeks of nothingness, I talked to my manager and I was like, maybe I should work on one of our services right now and actually like code up something that I have something to show for. And so I'm able to switch between creating services and like some of the infrastructure that we use, and then going back into the exploratory like data things to see if we can take advantage of some of the things that we have.
One of the guests we've had on previously, who's a professional principal consultant, Charles Martin, data science consultant, swears by Jupyter or IPython notebooks.
Oh my God, I want to start using Jupyter. I've seen it. Yeah. I haven't gotten the chance to do it yet, but I'm super excited to use those notebooks. They're amazing.
Yeah, they make exploratory type analysis really easy, and obviously reproducible is one of their big billable
and
items.
You're able to keep notes as you're working through and just kind of have the history of like how you're progressing toward the end result. I honestly think I've seen them, I've used them a little bit, but not really in my job. That's definitely something that I'm going to be using moving forward.
Sweet. Yeah, one of the this obviously isn't a sales video for Jupyter.
No, it's not.
It's open source software.
And I wasn't planning on talking about Jupyter notebooks, but they're...
Well, the reason, I guess the reason they rebranded from being called IPython notebooks to being called Jupyter notebooks is because the concept of a web UI where you edit and run snippets of code and interspersed with documentation was originally done in communication with a Python backend. Yeah. And Jupyter was a generalization of sending message passing to a backend that wasn't necessarily Python. So there are hypothetically Java backends now where you can make a Jupyter notebook and write your Java code that invokes Java functions, and instead of your web UI communicating with a Python kernel, they communicate with a JVM kernel of some kind. So this may be sooner down the pike for
yeah,
you than
yeah.
you
I've
might
only seen it
imagine.
in Python, but yeah, I'll definitely try that next time I'm like creating TensorFlow models.
Oh,
I haven't heard
sure.
of the JVM integration part of it. That's something to look into.
Yeah, there's different kernels. There's Julia language. There's Ruby.
Okay.
There's Haskell.
Yeah.
Up the wazoo.
Yeah.
One of the other guests we've had on also has a very similar background to you. I think he spent 5 years at Microsoft before moving to San Francisco to join a smaller company than Netflix called TuneIn. Alex Andreessen made a similar job switch from Seattle to the Bay Area, and when we chatted, we talked a little bit about the crossover from C# to a Java shop, or how translatable a career at Microsoft is to a career in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little to how the learning curve was for you coming from 6+ years at Microsoft to Netflix?
So I did a little bit of Java my senior year of high school, and then maybe one other class in college, but definitely spent like 6.5, 7 years without doing Java.
Mm-hmm.
I found the jump from C# to Java to be relatively simple. Like it's not, they're very similar languages, especially around syntax. There are some things that are pretty different in terms of like using Spring or Juice for dependency injection, which is what we do at Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, it was a pretty easy switch. I think the biggest difference is that a lot of the tools that you use in C# are basically .NET created, right? So created by Microsoft specifically. Where in Java, you just have so many more like open source libraries available to you. Sometimes a little confusing when there's like 50 string util classes, right? Like, okay, which one do I use for this? But aside from that, I thought the jump was relatively simple.
What were some of the onboarding processes that Netflix had in place for people like yourself who were not coming from a JVM Java background?
There generally isn't one.
Sure, yeah.
Looking at somebody's Java kind of background and figuring out how well they'll do in Java is part of the interviewing process at Netflix. So they want Java skills. And when we're hiring somebody, or at least the teams that I've worked on, when we're looking at somebody that doesn't have a Java background, then we try to figure out how easily it will be for them to jump over to Java. And if it's not an easy transition, then that's enough for them to not get the job at Netflix. So
is this pretty generally applicable to machine learning roles at Netflix, that Java is an important prerequisite?
No, for machine learning, it really depends on the job that you're working on, right? So for machine learning, I don't think Java is necessarily a requirement for, if that's your position that you're interviewing for at Netflix, I don't think it's a requirement. So,
but for many software engineering roles?
Yeah, for software engineering, generally Netflix uses Java, so we look for Java skills before you're hired. Yeah.
I mean, on that topic, I think we should take a moment to plug jobs at Netflix.
Yeah.
One of the things that Jose told me to make the audience aware of is that Netflix primarily hires experienced hires as opposed to recent grads.
Zero recent grads, zero or no interns. So it's not a place to apply to coming out of college.
However, for those who are interested and qualified, or are curious if you're qualified, you guys can check out software engineering roles, machine learning roles at jobs.netflix.com.
Yep. And read the culture manifesto that we have on the site. It really talks about like the culture at Netflix and gives you a good understanding of what you would expect there. Mm-hmm. Also very important for Netflix employees. So
for sure.
Yeah.
Glad you mentioned it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dude, Jose, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.